Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to be speaking to you about this upcoming full moon taking place in the sign of Aries on the 1st of October 2020. This astrological foresight is brought to you by 1millionnights.com. Now this is a rather special full moon which we are going to experience in a very intense way. Now, under normal circumstances, this full moon wouldn't really be any kind of problem because it would awaken all of our senses, the deep core of who we are, written in our genes and our instincts, our primordial self. Well, it can awake all of that to life, energizing us, giving us the emotional power, the strength to go out there and do whatever it is that we need to do in our own personal lives, follow our passions, our ambitions, stand up for who we are, our sovereign wills, etc. So this could be a celestial infusion of emotional energy, which on its own is really good and positive and uplifting. It simply energizes us emotionally, and it gives us the strength, the courage, the determination to go and basically take action, make choices with self-confidence, believing in our goals, believing in our journey through life. And naturally, the light of the full moon can also reveal very important things to us, especially about our own persona. It can also be a time of completions because this is the apogee of the lunar cycle. So, usually we might be feeling extremely proud of what we have done, what we have accomplished, how far we have come. It is also a very good time for self-reflection. So this potentially could be a time, when we take everything that we have basically done, accomplished, achieved in the past 6 months into consideration. And, that can offer all of us, a sense of completion, of wholeness, of achievement. But unfortunately, chances are that not a lot of people out there are going to experience the most positive expression of this full moon, because there is a lot of tension and even a very strong karmic and fated energy in the sky at the same time. So this is where the full moon is going to awaken not really the most positive expression of our inner selves, of our instincts, of who we are at the core of our beings, but it is going to awaken the most assertive, aggressive, violent energies inside of us, especially because at the time of that full moon, the moon is going to be forming a conjunction with Chiron, the wounded healer, in the sign of Aries. And that means that the light of the moon is going to basically expose all of our flaws, all of our traumas, all of our hurts and pains, even some which aren't even, ours personally. It can also be our ancestral wounds, our ancestral traumas. For example, all the hardships and all the, negative psychological patterns that we inherited from our families, from our cultures even, our local community, etc. So this is where basically it strikes a nerve. It strikes it really badly. So for very many people, this is going to be a time of great emotional pain, of great emotional turmoil. This is where the inner chaos, all of our hurts, all of our pains, our wounds, our dissatisfaction, our frustration is going to basically be like a pot of boiling water under pressure. So the steam is rising up and that it is just waiting to explode. It is waiting to detonate. And given the global circumstances, well, it won't take a lot for people to trigger, for violence, for assertion, desperate gestures, fanaticism. Basically, violence is going to be in the air. And this is where, because of the moon conjunct Chiron, a lot of people are not going to be experiencing all of this rationally, but rather instinctually. And Aries is exactly where our survival instincts are stored. That is basically the core of our instincts. So a lot of people are going to be triggered. They're going to go out there, take to the streets, protest violence. They will demand change. They will demand justice. They will demand everyone to respect their sovereignty. But of course, demanding is one thing. But when done with, a touch of fanaticism, a touch of instinctual violence, the desire to lash out, maybe vengeance, well, that is a totally different kind of expression and a totally different kind of dimension, basically. And as I said earlier, the biggest problem is Chiron, because it basically triggers our wounded self. It basically opens up all of our scars. And since the moon is also a symbol of our unconscious minds, well, then imagine the level which certain people are going to be triggered by this energy. And I mean a lot of people, because this is exactly the astrological setup where, like forced optimism, positivity, peace and love, and is simply not possible. Now, even if we sugarcoat our perceptions, our reality, etc., Chiron, the wound is still there. And basically, since the moon adds a lot of unconscious energy onto here, well, sweet-talking ourselves into peace, into serenity, into ignorance is simply not going to be an option here. But of course, if this wasn't enough, there is another energy in the sky which amplifies this almost 100 times, because also in the sign of Aries, we have the ruler of Aries, Mars, in the third decan of Aries, which means it's a very karmic, it's a very heavy place in the sky, and Mars is also retrograde, so it's extra close to the Earth. Its symbolism is amplified, and if this wasn't enough, it forms a perfect conjunction with Aries, goddess of discord, Mars' sister in mythology. So the female warrior and the male warrior are dancing together in the sky, and both of them are squaring Saturn and Pluto. Now, this means revolution. This means almost civil war. This means that, people will basically not be able to contain their frustration, their dissatisfaction, their cry out for justice, equality, dignity. They will also demand the truth. They will basically start fighting for their rights and what they believe in a very literal way, where they will physically fight if they have to. This energy is extremely potent from a psychological perspective. This has rage, anger, assertive vibes, conflict, violence, even military action written all over it. So on the world stage, I can almost guarantee that this is the beginning of the massive pivotal change, where basically people, individuals, the masses out there are gonna demand the total deconstruction of the old system, and one way or another, what follows is naturally the reconstruction. But before we can even dream of reconstruction, revolutionizing everything, we have to make it through these very, very intense and heavy times that await us all throughout the autumn. And also, this full moon happens just a day after Saturn went direct. So on the 29th of September, Saturn is standing still in the sky, meaning that its symbolism is greatly amplified. And Saturn is our restrictions, the limitations, the traditions, law and order. It is the symbol of centralized power. So that means that around that time, something is bound to happen where either they change the legislation in an unfavorable way for the citizens, or they implement new restrictions, new rules, new, let's say, game changers. Maybe they're going to take away certain liberties, certain rights, or maybe people are going to be perceiving everything that centralized power does as an attempt to trying to totally destroy the economy. So, tensions are going to be sky high. And Pluto is a fated energy. So a lot of very strong and significant fated events that are basically going to be very, very clear that this is the change, that there is absolutely no way we can go back to the old normality. Well, they are going to show up. And that will also trigger people the same way. Now, if all of this wasn't enough, Lilith, Dark Moon Lilith, is also in this picture. She also is conjunct Mars, but their conjunction isn't very tight. So that is already a good sign, because Mars retrograde conjunct Lilith, well, that represents the power of manipulation, where certain people, for example, criminals or instigators, are going to do everything in their power to spark up the violence that much more. They are going to basically want to trigger clashes between, the government and people, or military, police and people. So around that time, we really have to be very careful who and what it is that we trust. Because, going out and protesting in a peaceful way, that's no problem at all. But when you take place in violence, or when you follow someone's violent and assertive instructions blindly, well, that is not really okay. And chances are, manipulation, deception, or any kind of shocking, really, really shocking revelations, disclosures, secrets coming out in a very unexpected and stark way, can also make this situation that much worse. Because at the same time when this full moon takes place, Uranus from Taurus is going to be opposing Mercury, its lower octave, in the sign of Scorpio. Now this is a big problem, because on one hand, Mercury in Scorpio is all about secrets. It is all about detective work. It is even conspiracies, research, done in a non-very linear, non-scientific way. So that can spawn a lot of theories, a lot of truths, but also half-truths. So basically, it is the energy of confusion in the air, where it's not really the Neptunian type of confusion, where we don't know what we have to believe, what we should give credibility to. This is not gonna really be a question of what we believe or not, but practical information. Uranus is basically the cold, hard sword of truth descending upon something, and Mercury is the mind, the practicality of the mind, which perceives that truth. So it's gonna be really, really intense. Some kind of secret, some kind of hidden information, something that has been concealed or altered is definitely reaching daylight, because there isn't any other way this opposition between Uranus and Mercury can play out on the world stage. Now for us personally, this can be maybe a hint more chaotic, because Mercury in the sign of Scorpio, also in shadow, can represent psychological purges, because Scorpio is our subconscious. It is basically the meeting point between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. So there is a lot of things stored there, feelings, memories, events, experiences, everything that we have lived, but we couldn't basically process it at that time, so it is stored here, and that energy basically coming to the surface. Mercury is in shadow, so it won't take a lot of time before it goes retrograde in the sign of Scorpio. So that is basically the energy of preparation, inviting all of us to rethink, reanalyze, revisit the past, go within and basically try to purge out our subconscious. So this will make things that much more tense. This will make things that much more basically anxious, because secrets are being revealed on the world stage, but simultaneously certain things from our unconscious also come to the surface. So we are going to be stressed out in every single level. There is that Aries full moon with Chiron, our wounds. Then there is that psychological purge, Mercury standing across the sky from Uranus. And this also in a very quick, very intense, very almost anxious way. And then of course there is that Mars squaring Saturn and Pluto. So fight for freedom, fight for our rights, fight for our sovereignty. And at the same time, the Sun also holds a quincunx, a minor astrological aspect with Uranus, and that means unexpected twists and turns of events, unexpected manifestations of karma and fate. It can also mean shocks, surprises, epiphanies, revelations, disclosures, secrets coming out. But the quincunx kind of secrets are basically things which we don't even know how to perceive. They might take us totally by surprise. So naturally this has a mediatic warfare, psychological warfare written all over it. So not just the circulation of information and secrets being exposed and disclosures, but it also means conspiracies, an amalgam of truth and half-truth and deception and misinterpretation, filling basically the internet and everything in our lives which we use to communicate with each other, so to speak. So imagine the events that can basically be playing out both in our individual lives but also on the world stage. And this is the kind of energy where whatever goes on the world stage is gonna shock, surprise, and also confuse all of us. The truth may be out there and the truth might be exposed, but we might not know how to take it, how to perceive it, what to believe, what not to believe. So it's gonna be a really, really intense period at this full moon. Now there is a wonderful positive aspect playing out at the same time, where Mars holds a trine with Venus, Venus being in the anaretic degree of Leo, so a fellow fire sign. And this also means that Venus is going to be holding a trine with the galactic center in Sagittarius. And this energy, even though it is absolutely wonderful, it is courage, it is self-belief, it is the supremacy of our heart and emotional world. It is the inner child demanding its chance to experience and go through life with freedom, with the liberty to love and basically be in love with life. So this can be a really, really good time for creators of any kind, even artists, or it doesn't really matter what you do as long as you use the creative energies of self-expression. This can be a really, really wonderful, empowered period. This is where we can also have the courage, the self-belief, the self-confidence to go out there and just do what we need to do without questioning ourselves, without doubt, without questioning our worth. But if all of this blessing and positive infusion of emotions and passion and courage and all of this affects people who are fighting and who are being violent, well, that can just give them that much more power. So this kind of energy under the present circumstances is like a double-edged blade where it cuts both ways. Of course, there is a physical element to this as well, because Mars, especially retrograde, especially in its home sign of Aries, especially conjunct with another very volatile and chaotic planet, Aries. Well, this has fire hazard, explosion, the destructive element of fire written all over it. So we can expect explosions or fires or an accident or a disaster on a larger scale. For example, what we saw at the Lebanon explosions, something like that might repeat at this time. Now, of course, this is just the 1st of October. Basically, this is just the beginning of what's going to follow all throughout the autumn, because as we progress into October, things are gonna get even more tense. By then, Pluto also is gonna go direct, so we will have Saturn, Pluto and Jupiter, all of them going direct and perfecting their conjunction, as in getting closer and closer to each other, and that basically will reactivate and re-energize 23rd degrees of Capricorn, where January Saturn-Pluto conjunction took place. So that continues the big karmic theme of this massive global change. But at the same time, as the Sun moves further into the sign of Libra, there is going to be a T-square. The Sun is going to square all the Capricorn planets, and Mars retrograde is going to do the same, and they're going to stand across the sky from each other. So that is a very, very heavy and violent energy. You know, if now we're talking about protests and demonstrations, even legal battles like petitions, etc., or, you know, leaders being held accountable for what they have done, etc., now at that time, this is definitely gonna spiral out of control. There is basically no telling where all the revolution, the uprising, the violence, the protest, this massive fight is gonna be taking all of us as a collective. Then we also have, in a lot of places all throughout the world, elections, and the US elections are gonna be one of the most relevant. And chances are there are gonna be incidents even there, because around that time, Mercury will be standing still in the sky and going retrograde, and that means that there are gonna be disruptions. That means that, you know, maybe software, maybe the hardware part is going to fail, the results are going to be delayed, or maybe the election as it is, the whole thing is gonna be delayed and moved to another date. But even if it won't, there is gonna be some kind of incident or unexpected result or something that will shock us, surprise us at the same time. But it doesn't really need the elections to fire things up, because Mercury retrograde in the sign of Scorpio, as I repeat, that is the subconscious. That is the most arcane and secret layer of our consciousness, of our being. So that always means a massive purge. That always means going back to the distant past, reliving everything, trying to make sense of it, trying to sort it out, trying to make sense of your fate, of your destiny, trying to see where things are leading you, where the universe is guiding you. We are almost going to be obsessed by secrets, by finding out the truth, by being aligned to something true, authentic, valid. So, you know, this energy of Mercury retrograde in Scorpio is definitely going to spike things up. Especially that it's gonna oppose Uranus in the sign of Taurus. So basically, that means chaos. Inner chaos, outer chaos, financial chaos. That is gonna be a moment when, you know, markets might crash, or there might be a very unexpected twist and turn of events regarding global finances, currency, banking systems, etc. Of course, there is a very positive side to this as well. We have to mention that, because, you know, Mercury, one way or another, is responsible for healing, for regeneration, for the flow of energies in our bodies. It is the ruler of Virgo after all, and Virgo is a symbol of our physical bodies, of our earthly expression, especially our health. And Scorpio's symbolism is also responsible with regeneration, transformation, healing, purging. So this can be an energy which gets things done on a medical level, scientific level. Maybe they come up with something very ingenious. Maybe they revise old methods, old theories, old knowledge, methodology, and come up with something revolutionary. They upgrade it. So this Mercury retrograde can basically spawn or create or bring with it a lot of solutions, very practical, palpable, scientific, medical solutions. So that can also represent like a cure for the coronavirus, not a vaccine, but rather a treatment, a cure. But because, chances are it might not want to be released or given to the public, that can spawn more conflict, more protests, more unrest, etc. So, this is the kind of autumn that is waiting for us. And this new moon in Aries, it is just the beginning. It is just the fire which sparks up everything, which starts the detonation of this massive karmic bomb in Capricorn. But individually, it can be what you want it to be. Yes, on one hand, all of us are influenced one way or another by anything that goes on the world stage, because, it basically influences society and the collective that we live in. But on the other hand, we are the sovereign rulers of our own beings, so reality is what we make of it. It all depends on our perceptions, and if we simply do not allow ourselves to get sucked into the drama, that doesn't mean ignorance, it just means that we simply won't allow an emotional response, especially a very violent, assertive, illogical, excessive emotional response that is already a massive accomplishment, because the energy in the sky, it is there, but how it manifests, now that is not written in the stars, because that depends on us and our choices. And if that very, very assertive, aggressive Mars, especially with Aries, and then the moon with Chiron, now if that doesn't turn into aggression, frustration, depression, rage, losing control, because we don't allow it, that has to turn into something else, which can be the most positive side. Determination, ambition to heal. It can be passion. It can be faith. It can be willpower, simply not to allow ourselves to fall victim to whatever is going on in the world. And if we are not battling, the external limitations, that means that we're battling the internal limitations, and that always leads to something really, really positive: inner freedom, self-knowledge, self-discipline, self-control. And the Scorpio energy with Mercury in it, well, if we don't focus on external secrets, if we don't focus on how certain people or the media are manipulating the world in general, then we have to focus on ourselves and our inner world. And when we find out a very powerful or relevant secret from within, that is always a massive blessing. That is always another step towards self-knowledge and self-mastery. So we can only gain and benefit from this if we don't allow these energies to turn into violence, assertion, and conflict in our lives. Then they have no choice but to turn into something very practical and useful for us personally. And another very important element that I have to mention, well, Mercury in the sign of Scorpio, especially standing across the sky from Uranus, can represent the energy of fear. And fear is always like the silent karmic assassin, because it can simply ruin our lives. The simple emotion of fear, when fear runs our mind, when fear is alive in our hearts, well, basically that is more than enough to twist and turn our fate, our karma, everything that we have done in this life. Because it corrupts the heart, it corrupts our own personal magnetism, it disrupts everything, the flow of energies in our lives. So if anything, fear is the number one enemy. Fear is what we have to fight against and ultimately triumph. Whatever happens, it doesn't matter what the TV, the news, the media, social media, the internet shows, we must not allow that to turn into fear. Being diligent and precautious is not equal fear, because when we rationally analyze something and we make a decision that it's better to, I don't know, stay safe, it's better to buy 2 tins of food just in case, etc. That is not fear, that is diligence, that is wisdom. But when, what happens in the world keeps us up at night, when we basically fear to even go out of the house because I don't know who is watching us, or there is 5G, or government wants to implant microchips in us, etc. Well, that is a rather irrational fear, because let's say even if it would be true, can you actually do something about it without totally ruining your life, your sense of normality, your place in the world which you have fought for and worked for? Of course, it doesn't mean being ignorant. Knowing something, sheer knowledge, is absolutely fine, but when that knowledge or when our inner scenarios turn into like a very heavy fear energy which just disrupts our whole well-being, especially if it turns into paranoia or anxiety, that is way more dangerous than anything that can happen on the world stage. That is more dangerous than a war. That is more dangerous than the microchip, than anything, because that is how we make ourselves ill, very, very ill. Fear has no place in our hearts. If we look at history, it is those people who manage to overcome their fears and, even left them in the face, that really done great, great things in the world. Like, for example, all the astronauts, all the people who went out in space or on the moon, etc. Well, they knew fully well that their life could end in a second, that there's so many risks involved. No matter what anyone told them, they simply knew that they are risking their lives and their families and everything, but they still went ahead and they triumphed because they didn't allow fear to overcome them. Or, for example, let's say in the Middle Ages, all those brave men and women who dared to contradict the church and for the sake of science, logic and rationality. For example, that the earth revolves around the sun and not the other way around, spoke their minds, but they knew that chances are they're gonna be executed, and they didn't care. They didn't allow fear to rule over their beings, and they blessed our whole collective by their gesture because it changed the world. So basically, fear keeps us in slavery. We're choosing to overcome fear. Now that is true freedom, that is progress, that is evolution. Of course, fear has its role in our world, has its role in nature, so to speak, but that is a totally different kind of fear. That is basically an instinct which we inherit from, our animal ancestors, so from millions of years ago. We are living, breathing human beings after all. We are part of nature, so our instincts have to function the same way as, it does for every single animal. So of course we do feel fear, and it has a very important place and role in our lives, especially the instinctual fear. Well, it can keep us safe. It will help us avoid danger. For example, when you see a bear, when there is a bear in your field of view, well, you're not gonna go and run towards the bear, because you know that you fearing it is very logical, rational, and chances are the outcome is exactly gonna be what you fear. And, not approaching the bear and actually going the other way around is the logical choice. So that fear is something that is keeping your life safe. But when that fear is just a psychological energy, when it is just a construct of the mind, and it turns into anxiety, paranoia, and those programs running in the background of our minds, now that is the kind of fear which basically strips us from our life, our joys, our pleasures, our bravery, even our identity. So that is the kind of fear that we must eliminate from our hearts and our lives ultimately. Well, thank you so much for listening. I do hope you enjoyed it and you find it useful. And if you'd like a personal reading, just log on to 1millionnights.com and find your dedicated advisor, because all throughout the month of September, we have a very special promotion where you buy any of our prepaid packages and you get 10% free bonus credit. Thank you again. Until next time, bye for now.